promising young man.
Hello, everyone. I got an update on the United Healthcare CEO killer, Luigi Mangione, and this is from Law and Crime. Let's get into it.
With a bright future is now accused of cold-blooded murder. Luigi Mangione's alleged killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson has left us all with questions. If he did do this, what drove him to this crime? Why did he choose such a
Be
strange
back in a
escape
second,
route?
y'all.
How did he know where Brian Thompson would exactly be? Mystery deepens with every unanswered detail, but I'm going to talk with retired NYPD Detective Tom Verney as we break down everything we don't know about the case of Luigi Mangione. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. In a case that has absolutely shocked the nation, Luigi Mangione, a 26-year-old Ivy League graduate, former data engineer, stands accused of murdering UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson in an absolutely cold-blooded attack that appears to have been quite meticulously planned. Yet as investigators piece together the details of this crime, there are numerous unsettling questions that remain unanswered. What drove Mangione to allegedly murder a powerful corporate executive out of nowhere? And why, after such a what seems to be calculated attack, did he seemingly take such reckless steps in his escape? We're going to examine some of the more unanswered questions in this story. But before we even get into this, just a quick refresher on the case. So, on the morning of December 4th, UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson, a well-known figure in the healthcare industry, was shot and killed outside of the New York Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. And the suspect, later identified as Luigi Mangione, allegedly planned this attack, targeting Thompson in what appeared to be some sort of act of vengeance, maybe, against corporate America. On Monday, Mangione was apprehended in Altoona, Pennsylvania, after evading authorities for several days. Surveillance footage revealed that he had traveled by bus from New York City to Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and then Altoona. This is according to Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. And police found him in a McDonald's, where he was arrested without any kind of incident. When taken into custody, Mangione was found with multiple forms of identification, this 3D printed gun or silencer, this ghost gun, and written admissions about the crime, or that's what it appears to be. At his first court appearance in Blair County, Pennsylvania, Mangione's attorney told reporters
Yeah, I got a feeling she gonna get swinged. I don't know why.
Did you know that your favorite productivity solutions are free for eligible nonprofits? Microsoft 365 grants help power your nonprofit with access to Teams, Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, and more. Plus simple device management and best-in-class security to connect people and information. With Microsoft 365, improve cybersecurity, reduce costs, and empower work from anywhere. Get started at Microsoft.com/nonprofits.
that he and his client plan to contest to fight the extradition to New York City, where he faces charges of second-degree murder, weapons possessions, and forgery charges. Mangione was actually denied bail at that arraignment hearing in Pennsylvania because he's facing charges there, too, for having possession of the weapon and other related items. But he appeared at this extradition hearing to address his decision to fight it. Now, as these court proceedings continue, the investigation is continuing too into Mangione's motives, his background. Everybody's looking into it. And there are these unanswered questions about, again, what drove this otherwise successful young man who had all these opportunities to allegedly commit such a brutal act of violence. So to help me break it down and go into all of these unanswered questions, I want to bring on special guest, retired NYPD detective Tom Verney, to talk more about this. Tom, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I want to get into this, and I want to start with the victim in this case, because, when you think about it, why Brian Thompson? And according to police reports and what we know from this apparent 3-page handwritten document that was found with Mangione when he was arrested, the killing was really no spur of the moment kind of attack. The NYPD has confirmed that this shooting was targeted. And there's this 3-page document.
I'm back, y'all.
A manifesto, and it shows us some of the what seems to be alleged planning that went into this, because as part of it, it says the spiral notebook, if present, has some straggling notes and to-do lists that illuminate the gist of it. And in another part of the manifesto, UnitedHealthcare is mentioned specifically, where it says United is the, and it says indecipherable, we can't really make out that word, but United is the largest company in the U.S. by market cap, behind only Apple, Google, Walmart. It has grown and grown, but has our life expectancy? No. The reality is these, again, indecipherable words, have simply gotten too powerful. By the way, as we continue to cover updates in this shooter story, I gotta call out our incredible partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, for their support in helping make these episodes possible. Look, here's the deal. If you're injured, you have to know what your legal rights are and whether you can be compensated. Well, enter Morgan & Morgan. This is a dedicated team of over 1,000 attorneys, as well as case specialists, paralegals, investigators. Amazing track record, like recent verdicts of $12 million in Florida, $26 million in Philadelphia. These are the highest insurance offers in these cases. No upfront fee. The whole process from starting your claim to signing contracts, all can be done right from your smartphone. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC sidebar. Now, before I toss this to you, Tom, I just want to mention one more thing. So NBC confirmed that Mangione was not a client of United. This came out yesterday, and that reporting was actually supported by the outlet The Hill, because they're a senior NYPD detective reportedly revealed to them that Luigi Mangione, again, was never a client of United. So that theory that he may have been denied coverage in the past seems to be off the table. Tom, what's your take?
Thanks for having me. So this is a very interesting case in that we clearly have someone here who was very methodical about what they were doing. The act was also, it seems to be very clearly documented that it was premeditated as far as the murder is concerned. And he took great steps to conceal his identity, to evade the authorities for days and days and days, right? So, the fact that he shot and killed the head of UnitedHealthcare, the thought was, okay, well, he must have had a real bad grievance with them, right? He must have been covered by them, and then they weren't covering his back surgery, or he was denied coverage, and then just sort of went out on this rampage against that specific company. But now it seems that we're finding out that that isn't necessarily the case, and that Brian Thompson just happened to be sort of the figurehead and the focus of Mr. Mangione's ire, right? And he represents an entire industry that many people have problems with. And, but to go to this extent of hunting down, a CEO or someone from the C-suite of one of these insurance companies and killing them is not the answer. And clearly, we've identified that there are some issues with that industry that need to be addressed, but there are much better ways to go about solving those issues than just cold-blooded murder on a New York street.
I mean, do you think it's more symbolic, or was it something about him personally? I mean, when you look at the shell casings, and we've talked about this before, the words that were apparently written on these shells casings matching a book that was critical of the healthcare industry. It was also confirmed by authorities that his gun seems to match up to those shell casings at the scene. And then if you even go back to the manifesto, what might be going on here, it says, frankly, these parasites simply had it coming. So if you look at that, it makes you wonder, was this just Thompson? Was this to go after the heads of every health insurance company? And maybe it's just he started with Thompson. Maybe he was an easier target because he knew he'd be out in the open. But what do you think about that? Was it specifically about Thompson?
Be
Maybe
back
it
in
was
a
a larger
second.
kind of issue here.
Yeah, exactly. That's what the investigators are currently still looking to find out, right? So they're pouring through all of this. First we had some circumstantial evidence. Now we have actual physical evidence to go through. And this investigation is not over. There's because this act occurred in the streets of New York City, but as we know, he traveled from on a bus that originated in Atlanta, came to New York City, committed this act, and disappeared for days, wound up in Pennsylvania. So we have a multi-state investigation. So there are gobs and gobs of piles of evidence that need to be poured through to track where he started, how he got to New York City and did what he did, and then where he went and whatever he did after that until he was found in Altoona. Brian Thompson, again, is a representation of someone from an industry that has caused a number of people great grief, right, and angst. So, I think Mangione maybe thinks of himself as some sort of a hero or martyr, and there are a number of people on social media sort of painting him with that brush,
Right.
as we've seen so
get to
far.
that. But like, leaving the shell casings with those words, that feels deliberate, right? Allegedly writing a manifesto, seemingly knowing someone would pick it up, whether it was authorities, and basically confessing to the crime, saying, I'm letting you know I essentially did this, how I planned it, I acted alone. That seems, again, not only deliberate, but maybe he wanted or expected that he was going to get caught. Am I looking at it the wrong way?
Well, again, the messages on the shell casings were clearly meant to tell people that there was some sort of methodology as to why this particular person was shot. And the fact that when you see the video, there's someone standing within a few feet of Mangione, he doesn't shoot at them. So the fact that there's someone standing there's someone sitting in a parked SUV off to his left, and neither one of those people were in any immediate threat at the time, as he just only shot Brian Thompson and then left the scene, showed that he wasn't an immediate public threat. He was targeting one specific person and then left the scene. Bullet casings are showing us initially that there's some sort of meaning as to why this person was shot, right? And then that goes to a larger issue as to what the insurance industry has been deemed as, consistently and meaningfully denying people their claims, right? So to write those messages on the bullets themselves was certainly meant to make people aware, like, okay, I shot this guy. Here's some words to describe initially, potentially why I shot him and who he represents or what he represents in America and what's causing people so much angst.
And let me just couple that with one other thing. You talked about him not, or if it is him, not killing the bystander who was right there. In these writings, there's a fact that, or consideration about using a bomb to potentially commit this crime, but was worried about killing innocents. That this was not about a mass casualty event. This was very targeted and deliberate. Now,
Very
there's this other
targeted.
key factor that we have to talk about that begs the question about potential more targets here is the fake IDs. So Mangione, he was found with these IDs when he was arrested. And according to the police report, when he checked into the hostel in Manhattan a few days before the
Why
murder,
so
he
many,
apparently
though?
handed over a fake New Jersey ID with the name Mark Rosario on it. And this was the same ID that he presented at the time of his arrest when he was confronted by officers in the McDonald's. And according to police, they found multiple fake IDs in his bag and a passport. So why do you think he had all of these IDs? What was he planning to use them for, Tom?
Well, there's a good possibility he was planning to use them to possibly commit additional murders against other C-suite members and other insurance companies. That seems to be the thought pattern here, is that if he had gotten away with the killing of the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, then what was to stop him from continuing that with other people, either in that particular company or other companies? And that's what makes him a public threat too, right? Because at some point, he clearly has snapped, right? In order for him to go and commit this type of crime, especially since he's never been apparently arrested before. So to suddenly go from 0 to 100, there has to be something that snapped within him to make him feel like that was the only option, was to manufacture a ghost gun and go out and target someone from a specific insurance company. So that would lead us to believe that there were other potential targets that he might want to go after. And when you're attempting to shoot at someone, if you happen to miss and you hit the 9-year-old on the playground, that now leaves the rest of us open for danger.
Yep.
So it was important to get a hold of this guy as quickly as possible, because while his theory was, well, I don't want to really hurt the general public, I want to target my victims specific to the healthcare industry. There's always that possibility that something goes wrong and someone else gets hurt or killed.
Another big question is if he was acting alone. So, and I want to explore this a little bit. Did someone help him at all? Because we know from his writings and what was told to police in these writings, to save you a lengthy investigation, I state plainly that I wasn't working with anyone. But, is that true? There are some facts from the timeline of Mangione's whereabouts that maybe could suggest otherwise, because according to this timeline that was put together by CNN at around 6:30 a.m. on the morning of the shooting, so it's about 15 minutes before the shooting, there is surveillance footage that appears to show him on the phone. And who was he on the phone with? Did that person know what he was doing or was about to do? And then, sometime after this call, police say he positioned himself where he was lying in wait outside the hotel as Thompson was walking to an investors meeting at the Hilton Hotel. This is a big one. How in the world did Mangione, if he did this, know that Brian Thompson would be walking by the hotel at that exact time? Sure, he knew he was going to an investors conference. How did he know he was going early and taking that route? Did someone tell him he would be there? Tom, this is one of my main questions about this. The phone call and how he knew he was going to be walking on that street.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it stands to reason that there's a possibility that someone else could have known about what he was doing or could have been helping him in the commission of this act. And that's something that investigators are absolutely looking into. They're going to be combing all through his phone records, pinging his signal to see, where he was and who he was talking to. And, if they have not already started speaking to those people, I'm sure that they will, because they want to find out. Again, you want to bring this case to court. You want to make sure that you have as much evidence as possible, and that chain of evidence has been secured, and that all these dots are connected, every T has been crossed, and every I has been dotted, in order to allow a prosecutor to successfully prosecute this case where there is no doubt, right? So this case has to be prosecuted beyond a reasonable doubt that he is the one that committed this murder. And if there are other parties involved, to make sure that we can now go out and get them and make them as responsible as well. So in my opinion, is it possible that he could have been acting with others? I think it is possible. All the evidence seems to point right now to him specifically. So, but unless other evidence leads us to believe that there are one or two other parties involved, then they will certainly, track down those leads as they become available. The other thing to mention too is, his parents had listed him or reported him as missing, a while ago. But then when his picture was being splashed all over the media over the last week or so by the media, it's interesting to me that, his parents didn't, notice who that was and go to the authorities, right? So there is some sort of question as to whether or not at some point, even if his parents didn't know what he was going to do that day, at some point did they know soon after, once his picture became present, in the media?
We'll explore that, because you can make the argument, was it entirely clear it was him in that photo? There are people, I think, even online, who are not entirely sure that the photos from the surveillance match up to Mangione. But look, I think the other thing to think about is, could, from publicly available information, could he know that where Brian Thompson was staying, what time he was going to arrive at the hotel? Did he just, he left the hostel at a certain point, went to the Starbucks, arrived, you couldn't get at a more perfect time to find him. It wasn't like he waited all night outside of the Hilton Hotel and just was looking at every area to see where Brian Thompson would be. That hotel has a few different entrances. And so it's very curious, and it makes me wonder, maybe he was on the phone. I don't know who the phone call was with, but maybe he was calling a hotel to see if Brian Thompson had arrived yet. I don't know. But I'm just saying, do you think it's possible from publicly available information that he would be able to track down a CEO's whereabouts?
Well, it all depends on how much information Brian Thompson himself puts out on social media. So if the company was advertising that, hey, at this event, we're going to have our CEO Brian Thompson speaking at such and such time, then at least he's going to be within that area, during a certain period of time that day, either coming and going, right? And now, if I haven't seen information related to Brian Thompson and whatever social media he has. So if he himself put out something along the lines of, hey, I'm going to be in New York, or I can't wait to go speak at the Hilton Hotel at this conference, or whatever it may be, maybe it's possible that Mangione was following him on social media, and if people have to be careful about what they post sometimes, right? And putting their lives out there for people to see, especially if you are a CEO of a company where you've received threats. I would recommend to not be doing that and be very selective as to what you're putting out on social media. And and then maybe now after this incident, considering having some personal protection, especially if you're going to be in a very public setting.
Let me ask you this. This is another big question. There are aspects of this that seem so meticulous, so pre-planned, almost an element of criminal sophistication, but then there's not.
Yeah.
Like, for example, luxury checking into a hospital allows you to pay in cash, using a fake ID to check into the hostel, come into the city by bus to avoid detection, possibly, from means of, as opposed to going through an airplane or an airport, constructing this ghost gun that can't be traced, using a silencer on it to avoid detection in the killing, having a Faraday bag that you can block a cell signal. You would think all of this suggests criminal sophistication, but then the escape part of this is what doesn't appear sophisticated, because armed with multiple forms of ID, a fake New Jersey's driver's license, a 3D printed weapon, around $10,000 in cash, Mangione,
come on. Come on.
fair assessment would be he was prepared for anything. Yet, instead of making a beeline for a foreign
Come on. Come back on.
country, maybe with no extradition treaty, although I don't know if it would have worked, he takes this bus to Philadelphia, then travels to Pittsburgh, then makes his way to Altoona. He's ultimately arrested in the McDonald's, a very public place, and he was found with his passport on him. So again, seems like a convoluted route, but also trying to cover his tracks, and one of the things I don't understand is he allowed himself to be captured on so many cameras in New York City, the Starbucks before the killing, unmasked at the hostel. Assuming it's him, unmasked at the hospital, possibly flirting with a worker there. That's why he removed the mask. Leaves behind a water bottle, a candy bar or power bar wrapper that now they say his fingerprints are on. Leaves behind a phone. Again, as he's running from the scene, I don't understand how the two things don't coincide. I don't quite understand that.
Yeah. So there was an early debate occurring as to whether or not he was a professional hitman or just a disgruntled employee or someone with a grudge against the company or a grudge against Brian Thompson specifically. Yeah, and I didn't buy into the hitman theory early on because if this was a sort of professional, you wouldn't have probably seen him come onto the scene or leave the scene, and they wouldn't have left behind a treasure trove of evidence. So that led me to believe that this was someone with a grudge or some deep-seated issues against the company or Brian Thompson specifically. And you're right. He's a very smart kid. And I say kid because he's young enough to be my kid, right? So he's smart. We know he's college educated. Had a good successful job, and so it's not his intelligence that's in question here. It's the pre-planning and the actual act, and then the now covering his tracks is where that third part is where he sort of faltered. And I think the best laid plans that criminals have sometimes don't go the way that they expect. Especially, he must have seen at some point, either in a newspaper or on a news show or social media, somewhere on the internet, his picture being plastered all over the place. So at some point, he knew the jig was up. That there was enough of his identification visible enough where people could see him facially and say, hey, that kind of looks like that guy from New York, and which is what happened in Altoona, right? So he knew, I think, that there was a certain period of time where that they might catch up with him, and so whatever his original plan was, he had to now kind of shift gears maybe and try to figure out a plan B or a plan C or a plan D, because he must have felt the authorities hot on his heels, trying to piece together these different pieces of the puzzle, which initially, a lot of people were concerned, 24 hours have passed, 48 hours have passed, 72 hours have passed, so we still don't know who this guy is or where he is. And I was trying to sort of, advise people that these investigations don't get solved in 43 minutes without the commercials like on TV.
Yeah.
These investigations take a long time. There were mounds of video surveillance to go through. You can sit in front of a video, camera and review that tape for 8 or 10 hours to come up with 5 seconds of useful video. It's a very daunting task.
And I think it's interesting he puts himself in a public place. He was eating a hash brown at McDonald's, allegedly looking at a laptop, and you wonder, why didn't he just get the food and take off? Maybe he needed the Wi-Fi for the laptop. What was he looking on the laptop? The McDonald's element is a bit of a question too.
Yeah. Well, I heard the McRib is back, so there's, I can imagine the lure to want to be at a McDonald's. But and again, that could be very well the reason why he was there, if he wanted to plug into the Wi-Fi.
They'll be able to see what's on the laptop or what he was looking at.
Yeah. I mean, they'll get a subpoena to go into his laptop. Well, they have to get a subpoena to do that anyway, to get it to his phone. And there's all sorts of legal proceedings that they have to, And what's funny is, detectives, investigators have to jump through all kinds of hoops to be able to piece this together legally. And, criminals don't have to jump through any hoops. So, and that's why they want to make sure, since it's such a high-profile case, that they want to not only collect as much evidence as possible and extinguish any potential external threats that may be against other people, and make sure that if there are other parties involved, that they can get a hold of them first before someone else is being threatened, right? And then, just put this whole puzzle together and package it up nice for the DA and get it in front of a jury.
And look, at the time of this recording, we still don't know why he was in Altoona. So hopefully that part is explained as well. I do want to go into the gun. Okay, so the gun is really interesting. So the NYPD has confirmed that at least part of that was made using a 3D printer. Because of certain indentations, the design can be connected directly back to this free-to-download design. And a designer who contributed to that pattern told the New York Times that he saw photos of the gun after the shooting and immediately recognized that design. And the New York Times has also reported that the bottom half of the gun was 3D printed, while it appears the top of it, which includes the barrel, the slide, as well as the magazine and the ammunition, they were bought at a store. So court records also reportedly indicated that the silencer, also known as a suppressor, was also 3D printed. And whether Mangione made the 3D printed parts himself or he bought them from someone else, it remains unclear. But the gun, there's a lot of questions surrounding that gun too, right, Tom?
Yeah, and that's so. What's interesting about that? Well, first of all, these ghost guns are becoming a real problem in our society. Guns in general are a problem in our society. There are more guns in the streets than there are people in the United States, and so the fact that you can now download these specs and sort of print your own weapon that has no serial numbers and is virtually untraceable is frightening.
Do men or women have an advantage in family court? When it comes to custody, the law...
It's a real problem for law enforcement. And, that could explain the reason why there seemed to be some sort of malfunction when he was using the weapon. If you were to buy a 9mm gun from a gun shop, as I have, and I have 9mm out from my time in the police department. So even with a fully, even with a fully constructed weapon by an authorized weapon maker, you sometimes could have malfunctions, right? So now when you have a weapon that's sort of a mishmash of parts of a real weapon versus parts of a weapon from a 3D printer, and another, a silencer, a suppressor that may or may not be made for that specific weapon, or sort of fits but doesn't really, that's going to cause these weapons to malfunction even more so. And that's what we kind of see on the video, that he shoots Brian Thompson, but then there's some sort of a jam, and he's trying to clear the jam. He's certainly familiar enough with the weapon to be able to do that and continue shooting. So there was some preparation put into that, and having the knowledge of how to work that weapon. And even with the way that he's shooting, he's sort of standing in a shooting stance, or what we would call a combat stance. So either he received some sort of instruction on how to fire that weapon, or he watched some videos on the proper way to fire a weapon where you would be more accurate than some of these guys in the streets with the sort of firing sideways and gang shootings and whatnot. They missed a person that they're trying to hit, and they hit somebody else. So this whole thing with the ghost gun is pretty fascinating as far as how he was able to put it together, where he got the parts, or the means or the method to do that. And that's something investigators are also in the midst of trying to